Okay, good morning. Welcome to Adult Education. We are delighted to be together today. As you know, we are continuing with the good, the bad, and the uncanny, exploring the Older Testament. And today marks our second half of our study of the book of Genesis. So last week, Matt took us through Genesis 1 through 24, and I'm here today to take us from 25 through 50, which is ambitious. There's a lot that happens in this book. Welcome to those of us who are joining online as well. I put a link in the chat to a family tree. We're going to be looking at a family tree. Those of you in person will see one on the table in front of you. We're going to use that to kind of guide us through the stories that we're encountering today. So welcome and glad you're here. A few announcements. There will be posted online the second half of our interview with Anna Carter Florence. Each week we're going to feature a scholar interview on the website, so be sure to look for that. That'll help illuminate the second half of Genesis that we're studying. And you have opportunities to come and discuss the material further with me and Matt on Wednesday evenings, either on Zoom or in person from 6:45 to 8 p.m. If you're looking for the Zoom link, you'll find that in the Adult Ed e-blast that gets sent out. So you can just open the e-blast, you'll see the link there. If you're not getting an e-blast from us once a week and want to sign up, email Michael Gold and he can get you signed up for that e-blast. Those sessions are meant to be open sessions. No question is off limits. We had a great conversation on Wednesday night. We're looking forward to those continuing. So there's a lot of different ways to supplement what we're doing here. We also got a question this week. Somebody said, hey, I want to read along myself. Can you recommend a study Bible? Their Bible was probably their confirmation Bible, right? That leather-bound one that's sort of too nice to write in. And they wanted something with maps and annotations. So we would recommend looking for what's specifically called a study Bible. There are some samples on your tables there. Oxford, HarperCollins, and New Interpreters are all really good publishers to go through. And for translation, there's the New Revised Standard Version, which is what we use in the sanctuary, which we've been using it for a while. There's a recently updated version, the NRSV-UE, which stands for New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition, which is a lot. There are currently no study Bibles available in that translation, but Matt tells me that they're coming in November, so you may want to hold off on a purchase if you want the absolute latest edition. Okay, we've got a couple more chairs at the front up here, or you're welcome to set some more in the back, but we will be using the tables, so if you'd like to come forward and find a seat, we do have spots available. I know we're going to lose some elders to serve communion kind of midway through the class, so if people are leaving, they're not storming out. One hopes. Okay. So let's move on. Today we will be talking about family stories. We started last time, Matt started us on this theme of kind of origin stories. What are the origin stories of your family? And we're gonna continue in that theme here. There's a word that repeats itself frequently in the book of Genesis. The Hebrew word is toledo, which is these are the generations of, these are the descendants of. That word shows up 13 times in the book of Genesis alone, and it usually shows up at the start of section breaks when we're going to start to hear about a new family. So as we go through the text, we're going to be keeping our ears open for that word. And interestingly, the first time we see it is in Genesis chapter 2, verse 4, and it's not talking about people at all. There, that word toledo is these are the generations of the heavens and the earth. So that same word used to talk about the creation of the earth and the heavens is also used to talk about the creation of families. And I love that detail of the story, that God's relationship with this covenant family sort of emerges out of this overarching relationship to creation. So let's talk about what's on your tables, this genealogy of Abraham. And I posted the link for the folks in the live stream in the chat as well. So I have given you a genealogy. I want to give you a little help interpreting it. So men's names are in black, women's names are in red. That's one of the keys to interpreting this. The other, and it took me a while to figure this out, lines in black are lines of descent, and lines in green are lines of marriage, right? So you see a green line between Abraham and Sarah, that's a marriage. And then the line between Sarah and Isaac, that's a line of descent. Isaac is Sarah's son. Does that make sense as a way to understand this? So I want you to take a few minutes to look at this. There are some colored pencils on the tables. Grab a colored pencil. Just do a little underline underneath the names you recognize. Underline the names you recognize. The person who underlines the most is going to get a prize, and they're going to get into heaven the fastest. So, just kidding. This is a deliberate exercise. There probably should be names that are unfamiliar to you, right? We're gonna ask ourselves what it means, what we know and recognize there. Okay, so hopefully you don't recognize everybody. If you do, you shouldn't be in this class. So let's take a pause. What did you notice about any patterns that emerged, even in that question of names that you recognize? Yes, Susan, I see you, but I don't have anybody to get you a mic. Or here comes Matt's coming back in. Tim, do you mind grabbing the mic? It should be on that top rack, and just getting that over to Susan. Yeah, and then Matt can take over that job. Okay.
I noticed that I don't know any of the descendants of Esau.
You don't know any of the descendants of Esau, right? That's right. Anybody else notice other blanks or places where you, yeah, I'm seeing some agreement there. What else did you notice? Yes, Alice. Moab and Ammon. Yeah, Moab and Ammon, right? And what do you know about those names? Not much. Okay, yep, that's totally fine. Yeah, I saw Carol next to you with her hand raised.
Ishmael's descendants or the people below him are a total mystery to me. And when you get down to Reuel down at the bottom, and Eliphaz and all those, total mystery to me. So, some lines got coverage and some didn't.
Right, some get more airtime than others, right? So Ishmael and his descendants, Esau and his descendants, those branches of the family tree get less name recognition than others. Any other just noticings? Yes, over here. Let's see, Matt's.
There you go. Ammon. You asked about the significance of Moab and Ammon. So following that, the traditional enemies of Israel were the Moabites and the Ammonites.
Right, traditional enemies
who
who are also neighbors, right? There's Ammon, there's Moab. What's down there? Edom, right? So part of what this family tree is doing is accounting not just for people, but for peoples, right? Who are these neighboring peoples? Where do they come from? Are they related to us? How are they related to us? How did these similar groups of peoples end up proximate to one another? So this is more than just kind of a family tree. This is also telling us some stories of origins of peoples as well. And this is going to get real complicated, right? Because not all of these relationships among the peoples are very harmonious. I think you said enemies, right? There's a lot of friction and enmity among these neighboring peoples, but that's part of what this family tree is here to account for. So we've got place names. Edom is on this family tree, Moab, Ammon. And then what other place names do you see? Do you see any other place names? Ephraim, yep. Yeah. The Midianites, yep. Moab, Ammon, yeah. And then those 12 sons of Jacob, right, down in that lower right corner, are going to become what entities? The 12 tribes of Israel, right? And then what do you notice about Ishmael? How many descendants does Ishmael have? A lot. How many? 12. Right, there's a correspondence there. Ishmael also has 12 sons. They're called princes, right? So I think Matt said, either here or on a Wednesday night, that one of the things we discover in reading the Older Testament is that God has other stories too, right? The people that we know, the names we most recognize, aren't the only people that God is involved with. And in fact, in various places in the story, we'll see God paying particular attention to these other peoples. It's a footnote, it's an aside, but it's important and it's recorded. There's not this presumption that God is only involved with us and not with other peoples. And that's built into these family stories as we see them here. So we've already talked about place names. Well, let's take an overview of what we're going to see when we get to this section. We're going to see it sort of breaking down into two parts. From Genesis 25 through 36, we're going to be hearing about Jacob, and then 37 through 50 and sons, right? Genesis 37 is going to start with that word Toledo, the descendants of Jacob. So we're going to get stories about Jacob and his adventures, and then we're going to get stories about the sons of Jacob, the most famous of whom is Joseph, right? But it's not only about Joseph, it's an entire family story that we'll be seeing. And so I'm going to go through these stories. I'm going to sort of take us through these stories event by event. And as I do that, I would like you guys to be doing something as you listen. So there's more colored pencils on the tables, and we can get some more to the back as well. We've got some underpopulated tables here in an extra box. Yeah, if somebody could just run those to the back, that'd be, thanks, Matt. And what I'm going to have you do is turn this family tree into what's called a genogram. Has anybody heard of a genogram? Yes, I'm seeing some hands. What is a genogram? Could you explain that to us? Matt will get you the mic. We're just keeping you so busy, Matt, today. I know, it's true. We did not anticipate 80 degrees. We got right up here in the front.
Well, now I'm on the spot. It's a family tree that also has ways to put relationships between the family members.
Yep, that's exactly it. A family tree that also describes relationships among family members. So your classic family tree would have dates of marriage or divorce or birth or death. A genogram is going to have relationships. It's going to have secrets. A genogram might have affairs on it. A genogram might have, it might mention addictions. It might mention cutoff, estrangement. It's not the family tree that you inscribe inside your Bible, right? I encountered it first as a tool in what's called clinical pastoral education, which is training for ministers where you intern as a chaplain in a hospital. And they made us do genograms of our own families because they said, you will enter crisis situations and there will be families in crisis that bring their dynamics into the room, right? That come to the bedside and that sibling rivalry is there, or that person who's estranged shows up for the first time in 20 years. And you'll need to learn to navigate families, and the way to do this is to start with your own. So that's where I first learned about this tool. So basically, we're going to take this pretty family tree and mark it up as a genogram by diagramming the relationships that we encounter. And so I've got a set of symbols over here. And Tim, I don't know if you're able to put that in. Yeah, okay. They can help us do that. So the ones in blue, you might want to choose two colors. One for sort of more positive relationships, the other for more negative or difficult relationships. And you see we've got over here, harmony is up top. People who are extra close, that's 2 lines, who are good friends or well connected. There's love, that's a circle. People who are in love, 2 circles. And then over here we have conflict, a broken line. Hatred is a squiggle line. Estrangement, there's literally a cutoff between the lines. If you're having trouble seeing, you can invent your own symbols, right? The goal is not to make a perfect genogram here. The goal is to map for yourself these relationships as we hear them to get a sense of sort of the texture of this family story. You can also add other symbols to your genogram. I put jobs down here, hunter, shepherd. That's an ID card for a manager. I don't know how to do that one. Trauma, we got a lightning bolt for trauma. You can make notes about people's personality however you want. You can make this your own. I'll show you an example. This is the TV show Friends, right? So I'm glad that got a laugh. I didn't know if that was going to be generationally appropriate, but I didn't. Apparently, Ross and Monica are brother and sister. I didn't watch Friends. I didn't know that. But this is their family story. You see, there's some real enmity there. There's people who are close to one another. We see a sort of a triangle between Ross and his parents. We see there's a competitive relationship, but also love between Ross and Monica. Relationships are complicated. This is a way of picturing them. I would not recommend doing this with your own family without the help of a therapist. But it can be a really useful tool. So try this out, right? Draw a little genogram as we go through these stories to get a sense of who these families are. And I'll ask you again for towards the end about what you notice as we go through these stories. So. Let's move ahead. We'll start here with the story of Jacob. So this is actually the story begins with a prophecy. And the prophecy is given not to Isaac, but to Isaac's wife, Rebekah. Isaac and Rebekah are Jacob's parents. And the prophecy is 2 nations are in your womb, right? Rebekah is pregnant. She's having a pretty hard time in her pregnancy. She notices that, that there's something is happening in there, and God says you have twins. And these are not just twins, they are 2 nations in your womb. 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the elder shall serve the younger. Right? So this is what Rebekah hears when she becomes pregnant with Jacob and Esau, these twins. I want to just back up. I realize I've entered this generation without backing up to talk about the previous one. So this section does start with a little discourse on Isaac. And we see Isaac in this story sort of repeating some of the patterns that we saw from his father Abraham last week. So Abraham died an old man and full of years and was gathered to his people. And Isaac and Ishmael come together and they bury Abraham in a cave east of Mamre, right? So Isaac and Ishmael get together for this funeral. And if we remember, there is some real significant cutoff between Abraham and Ishmael, right? Abraham cast Ishmael out into the desert, almost killed Isaac. So there's some trauma and some difficulty in that relationship between Abraham and Isaac as well. But when Abraham dies, the sons come together, they bury their father. And then Isaac kind of repeats the patterns of Abraham's life. So there's a famine. Isaac ends up in the land of the Philistines, passes his wife off as his sister, right? So that he won't be killed. We saw Abraham do that with Sarah in Egypt, right? And here's Isaac repeating that same pattern. But then Isaac does pretty well. He prospers. The wells that Abraham dug had been filled in. Isaac reopens those wells. Isaac plants crops. Isaac has flocks and flocks of sheep. So he's really having a prosperous life. And then God fulfills this promise of descendants, and Rebekah has these twins. So things do not go well between these twins, right? Jacob is born grasping at Esau's heel. Esau is the elder, but Jacob is not comfortable from birth with that distinction. And then Esau and Jacob have pretty different temperaments. So Esau is like a hunter. He's like a big guy. He's out in the fields. He's hunting game. And Jacob is a quieter man. He's sort of more of a homebody. The parents have different preferences for the sons. Isaac prefers Esau, and Rebekah favors Jacob, right? Each parent has a preferred child here. And so in this rivalry, you see them kind of playing the parents off one another. Esau is out hunting one day. He returns from the field totally famished. He's really hungry. And Jacob has been at home working on a stew. And Esau says, "Give me some of that red stuff." The Bible repeats that word red twice for emphasis. He wants that red stew that Jacob has made. And Jacob says, "What will you give me for it in return?" And ask Esau to sell the birthright. And Esau is so hungry that he does. So Jacob kind of manipulates his older brother into selling the birthright, and his brother, who's a man of appetites, goes ahead and does it, right? And so in this way, Jacob steals that birthright from his older brother. We see this repeated later, a sort of second similar parallel version of the story. The Bible is often telling two slightly different versions of the same tale. So we'll see this again later towards the end of Isaac's life. He wants to bless his sons, and specifically that older son. Isaac loves Esau, and so he wants to pass along the same kind of blessing to him that Isaac himself has received on the death of his own father. But Isaac, his sight has gone bad. He's having trouble seeing, and Rebekah is aware that Isaac intends to bless Esau. Now, Esau has done something bad. He's married foreign women. That's another theme we're going to see repeatedly. So if you look at your chart and see who Esau's wives are, Esau has taken wives among the Hittites, who are some neighboring peoples in the land. And this displeases his parents. They were especially noxious to the mother-in-law, to Rebekah, right? The mother-in-law is not getting along with her daughters-in-law. And so Rebekah doesn't want Esau to inherit. She wants Jacob to inherit. And so with Rebekah's help, Jacob concocts this scheme where he takes some sheepskin and he ties it to his hands in the back of his neck, and he goes to his father with some of that meat stew in order to receive the blessing. And Isaac can't see, and he says, "Why do you have Jacob's voice, but you feel like Esau?" Esau is a harrier guy, right? He's this sort of like burly man out in the wilderness. And so Isaac blesses Jacob with the blessing intended for the older brother. So again, we have the younger brother supplanting. And so Esau gets real mad, understandably, that his brother has stolen not just the birthright, but also the blessing. And Esau is planning to kill Jacob. At this point, Rebekah says to Jacob, "Get out of here. You got to leave this. You got to leave your father's house and go and find a wife among my kinsmen." So if we look at Jacob on this family tree, and we see who Jacob is marrying, right? Who is Laban to Jacob? How are those two related? Uncle, right. This is Rebekah's brother, Jacob's uncle. So Jacob is finding a wife from among his kinsmen, from within that line that came with Abraham out of the land of Ur into the land. So Jacob's sort of marrying within the family, which the Bible seems to prefer, right? This may not go along with our modern norms of what is an acceptable marriage, but here marrying your cousin is a valuable thing. It's perpetuating this line of the people. And so Jacob arrives at Laban's land, and on his way he has his dream. So this is my fight-flight dream, right? Jacob fights with his brother, he flees, and then he has that dream of the ladder ascending into heaven. God is present with him. He names the place Bethel, and invokes really God's presence with him in this dream vision that he has there. So what happens next is that Jacob marries and then marries again. So how does this come to pass? So Jacob has encountered in Rebekah's brother someone very much like him. So Isaac prefers Esau, and Esau, like his uncle Ishmael, is a hunter, right? Ishmael, you will be a wild ass of a man, God says. Esau is also a hunter. They have this similar sort of personality. Jacob and his uncle Laban are both tricksters. And what we're going to see next happening is just this exchange of ruses. Jacob and Laban trying to just outcon one another. And it begins with the marriage. So Jacob arrives at Laban's land. He meets Rachel, and he's so enamored of her that he has this superhuman strength and removes the stone from the well so that she can water her sheep. It's this really romantic introduction, and he loves Rachel, and he agrees to serve Laban 7 years in exchange for Rachel's hand in marriage. And then what happens on the wedding night? Who knows this part of the story? Yeah, Donna, go ahead. Let's get the mic up here.
Well, it's Leah and not Rachel.
Yeah.
And he makes them work for another 7 years for Rachel.
Yes, exactly right? Swap-a-roo, right? The same, like Jacob gets a taste of his own medicine here because he had impersonated his brother to get his father's blessing. And then when he comes to get married, right, they have this big feast. Everybody parties. It's the wedding night. They go into the tent. And then the Bible literally says, when morning came, it was Leah, right? So there's this theme of deception that takes place. But Jacob loves Rachel so much that he is willing to serve 7 more years. And the Bible says this. The Bible is very laconic. It doesn't give us a lot of narrative detail, narrative texture all of the time. But it does say, Jacob served 7 more years, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for Rachel. So there's this real sort of tenderness in that relationship. And we saw that between the parents too. Isaac and Rebekah really love each other, or at least Isaac really loves Rebekah. I'm not sure whether that's as mutual. When Rebekah first sees Isaac, she falls off her camel. And I don't know, she's already betrothed to him. Somebody else has arranged that marriage, and I don't know whether that's a positive or a negative thing. But Isaac sees her, and he immediately falls in love with her. He's comforted for the first time after the death of his own mother. So there's love in these family relationships, as well as obviously a lot of economic interests and family ties and other things that are happening there. So we have Jacob married to both Leah and Rachel now, and it's time for some children to arrive on the scene. So I put some Bibles on the tables, and I am hoping you guys can open to Genesis chapter 29 in your Bibles, and I'm just going to ask for somebody to volunteer to read some of the meanings of the names of Rachel and Leah's children. Okay, so I'll let you guys get to that part. We don't need everybody to have a Bible. We just need somebody who's willing to do some reading aloud. Okay, we got it over here. Okay, excellent. All right. So I'd like you to look starting in chapter 29, verse 31. Have you got it?
Yes.
Okay, so the first child born, who's the firstborn son? And who has a son first? Leah, right. You can see them arranged beneath the mother's names in order, in their birth order. Okay, so what does Reuben's name mean?
Because the Lord has looked on my affliction. Surely now my husband will love me.
Right. She names Reuben, which means see a son, right? Reuben, Ben is son. And it's because the Lord has looked on my affliction. Surely now my husband will love me, right? Leah names the dynamic in naming her children. What about the next one? What about Simeon?
Because the Lord has heard that I am hated.
Yep, he has given me this son also. Simeon, Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel. Simeon, the Lord has heard me. What about Levi?
Now this time my husband will be joined to me.
Yep, Levi, Leva joined, right? Now my husband will be joined to me. And then let's go to Judah.
This time I will praise the Lord.
Right, Hodah, praise. This time I will praise the Lord. So Leah, in naming her children, is sort of desiring that this will improve her relationship with Jacob. Then who has children next? Bilhah. I heard somebody say Bilhah. So who would like to find that part and read those names to us? Any volunteers? Are you willing to keep going? Yeah, great. Okay. So Bilhah has the children. Who names the children?
What's it? Sorry.
Bilhah has the children, but who names the children?
Rachel.
Rachel names them. And what does she name them?
First one is Dan. God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son.
Right. So Rachel is having trouble having children. We're going to see this again and again in the scriptures. And so she has her handmaid have a child for her. Yep, that's complicated. And again, these children are part of this rivalry. So then we've had Dan, and now who are we going to have next?
Naphtali.
Yeah, what does Naphtali mean?
With mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed.
With mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister. So we see Rachel and Leah wrestling. Who are we going to see wrestling later? Jacob, right. And who's he going to wrestle? An angel, God. I heard somebody say his brother, right? The text is actually really ambiguous when we get there and will support all of those meanings. So we have this wrestling theme coming in again. Zilpah. Who's Zilpah?
Leah's maid.
Leah's maid. So Leah tries the same thing. And who comes of that union?
Gad.
Gad, which means...
Good fortune.
Good fortune. And then who's next?
Asher.
Asher. And what does Asher mean?
For happy am I.
Happy.
For the women will call me happy.
For women will call me happy. I love that the name Asher means happy. That just feels so appropriate to me. So then there's a dispute involving some mandrakes. Leah, I don't know. Leah exchanges her son Reuben's mandrakes in exchange for permission to lie with Jacob again. Leah gets pregnant again, has Issachar and Zebulun. I'll just go ahead with these. God has given me my hire, Sakar, because I gave my maid to my husband. And Zebulun, God has endowed me with a good dowry. Now my husband will honor me. So again, Leah has two more sons. These names, again, are about this competition. And then who comes after that? Joseph. There's actually one person in between. Dinah. There's a girl, right? Jacob and sons, and a daughter. There is a daughter in this story, and we don't get an etymology of her name, but she is going to get an important chapter later on that will also account for some of this regional conflict that we're seeing. And then finally, we have Joseph. And so it says, then God remembered Rachel. Rachel has a son, names him Joseph, which means he adds, right? Not the Lord has added Joseph to me, but may he add another son. So Rachel gets Joseph and wants another. And it's going to take chapters and chapters for Benjamin, the last of the 12, to arrive on the scene. So I'm going to stop here because that's a lot of information about this family, but I'm curious about what your thoughts and reactions are to hearing this story. Alice, go ahead. Jacob is very busy. Yes, Jacob is very busy. Yes. No, that's right. Yeah, Ken, go ahead.
I'll get there. I think it's important. Not that we not overlay our moral, ethical perspective on marriage with the ancient world, which was radically different and had a lot more kids dying, among other things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's right. So these sons are, these women are praising the Lord for these sons because children, children even now are precious and special and fragile, right? And in the ancient world, even more so. childbirth was not a guarantee that you would raise a child successfully. Rachel will actually die in childbirth with Benjamin. And we can't, overlay modern assumptions about women's roles or about marriage and how marriage works. I do think we can look for things that are recognizable and human in these relationships. And to me, I find a lot of these sibling rivalries and parental preference and the family dynamics there. To me, that is something human and recognizable in this. This isn't only given as a list of the children born who will go on to support the family line. This is also mapping human beings and their emotions and their relationships as part of the story, which is a place that this part of the story, the Jacob part of the story, feels somewhat different from the Abraham part of the story. Abraham, the relationships in the Abraham story were very vertical. Would the line continue, right? Would Abraham be able to perpetuate the line? Sarah's fertility is a big question mark, both of their ages. And so really the vertical family relationships seem to be the ones in peril in the Abraham story. The tensions are between Abraham and Ishmael, Abraham and Isaac. And when we get to Jacob, a lot of the squabbling gets more horizontal, right? It's Jacob and Esau who are fighting. And then we'll see when we get to Joseph and his brothers who are squabbling. So these are sort of differences in emphasis that we see in these stories. And the emphasis seems to shift more to how does this family get along as it grows and multiplies from the will this family continue at all, which is the dominant question in the Abraham narrative. So that is a shift that we see. We also see a lot more scandal in the Jacob story. We see a lot more earthiness in the Jacob story than we did in the Abraham saga. These may have to do with sort of different points of origin. The Jacob story is thought to belong to kind of the northern tribes, less to Judah, and the sort of the sense in Judah of a stable royal line. The northern tribes, a lot less tied to the institution of kingship, to the temple in Jerusalem. We see important places like Bethel, where Jacob builds a shrine coming out of those northern stories. So we're seeing also sort of in the texture of the literature of the Bible a really different kind of narrative here. So let's keep going with our Jacob story. So we got Rachel and Leah and Bilhah and Zilpah on the scene. Then we're going to add, we got fight, flight, and wrestle, right? So we again see this pattern, right? Jacob fought Esau, fled, had his dream. Now Jacob fights Laban, then flees, and then wrestles. We've already talked a little bit about this wrestling, this kind of mysterious angel, God, man figure that Jacob encounters. So we already talked a little bit. There was earlier in the story some trickery going on between Jacob and Laban that had to do with reproduction, right? Rachel swapped with Leah. Then, post arrival of the children, Jacob now needs to find ways of providing for his family, needs to be paid to do it. He needs to build up his flocks of his own. So we have some reproductive trickery again, this time involving sheep, okay? So this part of the story, Laban says, how can I pay you? How can I compensate you for your labors? And Jacob says, just give me among your sheep the speckled, the striped, the black lamb, give me those among your flocks. And so Laban's like, great, sure, no problem. Come check it out tomorrow. And then has his sons take away from the flocks and take 3 days' journey away all the speckled and the striped of the sheep, right? So they're all brought to another place. And so Jacob then has a trick of his own. So Laban's trying to con Jacob. Jacob takes poplar sticks and strips them of their bark and puts them in the ground in front of the breeding sheep. And so what happens, obviously the obvious thing, which is all the lambs that are born of the sheep that breed in front of the stripped sticks of poplar are striped and speckled and mottled. I don't know why. Jacob, obviously figured out something about sort of Lamarckian descent, and that's how it worked out. But Jacob breeds, and he only does this with the strongest of Laban's sheep, right? So he takes the strong sheep, has them mate in front of these sticks, the weak sheep mate over there, and so he generates these lines of sheep with differing strengths and cons his uncle again, right? So Laban figures it out, there's a big fight, Jacob has to flee. So we see again this pattern emerging in this part of the story. And at the end of the flight, Rachel does some trickery of his own. Laban overtakes them. Rachel has stolen Laban's household gods to go on the run, and so he overtakes them. And Jacob is like, oh no, but God has told Laban not to hurt Jacob, They agree to part ways amicably, but Laban says, what about my household gods? Why did you take them? And Jacob doesn't know that Rachel has stolen them, and so he says, I will kill anybody who took the household gods, right? So he's unwittingly put his own wife in peril here. And so Laban goes into the tents of each of the wives in turn, the maids, and then Leah, and then gets to Rachel's tent. And so Rachel also has to think quick. And so she's hidden them under the camel's saddle, which is off the camel in her tent. She's sitting on top of the camel's saddle. The gods are underneath her. And she says, Father, forgive me for not rising, but I am as the way with women. So it's her time of the month, she says. So I'm not going to get up and greet you. I'm just going to sit here. And so she sits on top of the household gods, and Laban doesn't find them when he searches the tent. So this is an insult to the gods, right, if this part of the story is true. But it's also evidence of Rachel's craftiness, Rachel's agency here, and her ability to participate in this sort of manipulation and this trickery that's happening as well. Then Jacob gets caught up in this fight scene with the mysterious figure of an angel, and then and what happens in the fight scene? So let's move to that. I'm skipping the Joseph story. I think I've already told you guys that I don't like the Joseph story as much, and so I'm lingering in the Jacob story. This is where Jacob is in the night. He's past Laban, and he's about to encounter Esau again. Remember Esau from chapters and chapters ago. 20 years have passed. He's spent 7 years serving for Leah, 7 years serving for Rachel, and then 6 years breeding all of those generations of sheep, right? And so now he's left Laban. Laban has given him free passage. The one thing is he's got to make his way past Esau, who's living in Edom at this time, because Esau is populating the Edomites. And so he sends a delegation ahead to bring lots of presents to Esau. Jacob's kind of afraid of Esau still. He's calling him my lord. He's sending him lots of sheep ahead of time as gifts and presents to kind of placate him. He thinks Esau is probably still mad about what happened when they were kids. And so this is the night before they meet each other. Jacob is at the Jabbok, at the ford of the Jabbok, this river. He sends his wives and his children across the river, and then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak, right? So there's ambiguity there. Is it a man? Is it an angel? Is it God? That same word man has showed up when the angels showed up before Abraham in Mamre, the ones who go to Sodom and Gomorrah, right? We see this sort of blurring of the lines between whether something is a human figure or an angelic figure. There's this fight. It's not clear who's winning. The man does not prevail against Jacob, but then strikes Jacob on the hip socket, puts the hip out of joint, but Jacob's still hanging on and says, and I just love this line, I will not let you go until you bless me. And I think that's so emblematic of Jacob's relationship to other people, right? And also his relationship to God. This same struggle that shows up in Jacob's conflict in his family is also in his relationship with God. Jacob is not, like Abraham, sort of faithfully trusting that the promises will come through. Jacob is struggling and claiming them for himself. And so then the man asks Jacob his name. And he says, Jacob, and the man says, you shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed. And what I love about this story is that it locates the name of the people in this struggle with God, right? That the people is named after the character who is fighting this, who is able to wrestle and struggle with God, and that is acceptable in some way, that is part of this relationship, and in fact, even where the name comes from. And so Jacob blesses the place, gives the place a name. This is kind of a parallel to that Bethel story in the beginning. And then we get a sort of ideological story about the eating of a particular kind of meat that comes out of Jacob's hip injury. So this is that Jacob wrestling story, and this is I think this is Matt's favorite story in Scripture. Is that right, Matt? Is this your So let's pause here. We will get in brief to Joseph, but I'm curious about what you're seeing or have seen in the kind of patterns that are emerging in these stories, or what questions are arising, because I've just aired this whole family's dirty laundry, right? I did not give you a very faithful, pious sort of whitewashing of this. This is warts and all. So what are you seeing or noticing in this? I'll give you some time actually at your tables, and then we'll come back to the full story. So talk over that question. What patterns are you noticing here? Okay, I'm going to bring you guys back to the full group. Let's come back together. And what I'd like us to do is just have a couple minutes of hearing about what patterns you've noticed in the story so far, and then I'll close us by talking about Joseph. So, what did you guys notice in your small group discussions about patterns or whatever else emerged from this? A lot more questions. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
I would say it was a real fight for survival. We've discussed it. It's a real.
A fight for survival. Yep. There's a reproductive element of that. There's also just amassing the kind of wealth or the kind of assets. Sheep, goats, land. I mean, these are going to be the major questions of survival in this. Yeah, absolutely. What else? Yeah, Paul.
The promise to Abraham was he'd be the father of many nations. And what I find most fascinating for me is that the text even includes the non-Jewish nations, because if I was to write this, I would say we're chosen. If I'm Jewish, we're chosen. God chose us. Yeah, there are a lot of others, but he chose us. And so this is the genealogy of the chosen.
Right.
And he blesses the chosen and he curses the chosen, but he cursed all the other ones.
Yeah.
So why are they even there? Why are there 12 tribes of Ishmael and there are 12 tribes of Jacob?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's very significant that Abraham's the father of all nations in their mindset, not just of the chosen. And that means me as a non-Jew, later in Isaiah and in the prophets, I get included in that whole thing because I ultimately am part of the nations, not the chosen nation.
Yeah, there's this all families of the earth shall be blessed through you, right? This is not something to keep, it's something to share. And I think it's also interesting that I like where you're going here with this sort of this as like ideology story. This is a story of beginnings that explain things. And it's actually, especially with the character of Jacob is not a moral hero of this story. I think even within the frame of the text, Esau actually shows up as a much more stand-up guy in this than Jacob does by a lot of measures. So after the fight scene at the river, Jacob and Esau do meet. And Jacob is ready to just be so subservient to his brother. He calls him my lord. He stacks his wives in order of preference with Rachel way at the back. So if Esau gets angry, she'll be the one that he gets to the last, And instead, there's this beautiful moment where Esau just runs to Jacob and embraces him, falls on his neck and kisses him. There's this real tender moment of reconciliation between the brothers that happens after this fight scene at the Jabbok, which is why it's really interesting, that ambiguity of who is Jacob fighting there. And then Esau says, I will go with you now. Let's be together again. And Jacob says, I'm traveling with my wives and all these children. We're really slow moving, so we wouldn't want to hold you up. But we'll meet you at Edom. We'll go with you back to your place, sure. And Esau says, well, I could leave some of my people with you to protect you and to go along with you. And Jacob says, no need to send a guard with me. So Esau goes ahead back to Edom, expecting Jacob to go with him. And Jacob just goes off in the other direction, right? Like Jacob does not go and visit his brother as promised. He just goes on to Canaan, to the land of Canaan, where he's going to settle. And just sort of, he ghosts him, basically, after this moment of reconciliation that they have. And the next time that they see each other is, as with Ishmael and Isaac at Abraham's funeral, the next time that Jacob and Esau see each other is going to be at the funeral of their father Isaac. So there are these moments of reconciliation, but the conflict kind of continues. All of this to say, you'd think if you wanted to tell a story in which Israel was the good guys and Edom the bad guys, you wouldn't include all this complexity, right? Like you wouldn't include your own ancestors' moral culpability in some of this. So we're getting this really nuanced picture of these rivalries among the tribes, and not one that's willing to only ever present them as subordinate or bad guys. It's not even clear by the end of this narrative that Esau is serving Jacob, that the supplanting of the order of birth has really fully taken place. And I think one of the strengths of the text is that it preserves that kind of ambiguity of relationship among peoples, and there are certainly strains within it that project this kind of national identity and pride, but also preserves a lot of nuance, a lot of depth, and not moral purity, which I think is a real strength of this text and something that fascinates me about it a lot. Any other thoughts or questions here? Yeah, Ken, and then I see Kathleen.
We talked about much of what you were talking about, and also someone made the point that the bad guys don't seem to come out poorly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they get land, blessing, a lot of sheep. Yeah, that's right. The bad guys don't come out poorly. They do in the Sodom and Gomorrah story, but other places not necessarily. Yeah, and then Kathleen in the back.
You said this is Matt's favorite verse. I would like you to enlighten us why.
Matt.
The passage as a whole, the image of wrestling with God, and that Jacob also seems to win. That that this is a God who is contending with humanity, just like humanity contends with God, and that's kind of matches my own sense of faith and life. Yeah. It says something about God, that God is willing to engage like that, as opposed to hurling thunderbolts from the mountain. Right, and never coming down, so to speak, to where we are.
Yeah.
And there's that pathos at the end as well, where, right, Jacob walks with a limp for the rest of his days because of this.
Yeah, it costs him something.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's very embodied, I guess is the shorter way to say all that.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. Okay, I'm going to move along, and in our remaining 3 minutes, cover the entire story of Joseph. Right, because that's in there too. You will notice a real difference in literary style when we get to Joseph. I hope that part of what today has done is convinced you that the Jacob story is actually highly organized and structured and plotted. It has all these weird details, all these different perspectives, some contradictions, but it has been organized by a redactor in this orderly way with sort of repetition of different types and elements. But when we get to Joseph, we get something that looks honestly a lot more like modern fiction. We get a lot more detail, we get more dialogue, we get fewer acts of intervention by God. We don't have angels popping up and wrestling with people. We don't have God speaking from the top of a ziggurat, right? We have some dreams that get interpreted, and we have events that work out in this sort of highly coincidental kind of plotted way. Things work out for the best in the end. But we do get a really different sort of literary style and worldview. If you come on Wednesdays, that can be one of the things that we talk about. But it's, again, another shift in how the Bible tells the story, and telling the story in the way that we see God's hand at work, not necessarily just through divine voices or angelic appearances, but by things working out in a certain way. So we'll see that in the Joseph story. And it is still linked to the Jacob story, because it begins with sibling rivalry and it ends with reconciliation. And by the end of Genesis, Jacob has died, Joseph has died. They have not yet been buried, right? The people are still in Egypt, and we'll have to see what happens to the people when they are there. That'll be next week with Matt and Exodus. Thank you for being here this morning, and looking forward to continuing with you. Thank you.